In our discussion of the Proverbs so far, we've been looking at sort of the advantages of wisdom. Remember, in this series, what we're doing is we're taking a look at these 10 lessons that the father gives to his son or his sons. Perhaps even we're including the mother in that. So it's the instructions of the parents to the children, more or less, that sort of set you up so that you might be able to receive wisdom or understand wisdom or give you a framework for all of life. In many ways, this whole enterprise is giving us the wisdom way of life, that we might be able to put wisdom's glasses on and understand the world in a different way. And so here in this session, what we're dealing with is this idea of grace and kindness. In other words, there's a way to orient ourselves to life. And the best way, it seems that the father is suggesting to the son, is to do so with both grace and kindness. Now, before we jump into this subject here, before we jump into the topic, I do want to just pause and talk about wisdom in and of itself. It begins in chapter 3, verse 21, maintain sound wisdom and discretion. My son, don't lose sight of them. The father is very concerned that his son wraps his mind around this idea of wisdom. Wisdom, of course, plays a huge role throughout the book of Proverbs. It plays a huge role, I think, throughout all of Scripture. And I think it would just help us a little bit to back up and ask a question. What do we need to observe about wisdom in general? Van Leeuwen has made some very interesting observations about wisdom, and I think it might be helpful for us to just talk about these briefly here. He notes 4 different things about wisdom. He says, first of all, it begins with the fear of the Lord. We saw this back at the beginning of Proverbs. We'll see it again in Proverbs chapter 9. It occurs in other places throughout the Old Testament. This idea that the fear of the Lord really is the foundation or the beginning of wisdom. But along with that includes this category of wonder. In other words, I don't just stand in awe of who God is. I also recognize that because he is great and awesome and powerful and sovereign, there's so much that I don't understand. This element of humility, of being able to stand at the feet of our Creator, knowing that there's more out there than we could ever possibly understand, I think is crucial for us being able to place ourselves in a position where we can receive wisdom. In fact, at the end of the book of Job, it seems that God's main corrective to Job or correction to Job is not that his theology was necessarily wrong, or not that he actually had done all of these secret sins that all of his friends were accusing him of. The problem, it seems, is that Job had missed a bit of this category of wonder, that he had lost sight of the greatness of God and the massive nature of God's sovereignty. Job, in a way, sort of wanted to keep God inside of a box, or he wanted to bottle him up, or he wanted God to act in the way that Job thought God should act. And God says, listen, I just want to take you on this tour of creation, this tour of all of the universe. And you tell me, Job, were you there when all of these things were created? In other words, there's this category of wonder that I think is involved in the fear of the Lord. And if we're going to have wisdom, I think we begin with that. Here's the second thing Van Leeuwen notes. It's concerned with the general pattern in the order of creation. In other words, this is just the way that the world works. We begin to understand that wisdom, as expressed in creation itself, really is really just order. It's the way that things are arranged and ordered in a way that makes them function, makes them work well, in a way that is good. It's in some ways like tuning an instrument. As we begin to live our lives according to wisdom, it's like we're tuning our lives in tune with the way that an instrument is supposed to be played, in order that when the strings are strummed or whenever the notes are played, they sound good. They sound like they resonate because we are living our lives in tune. This, in some ways, is what wisdom does for us. Number 3, wisdom provides discernment for life's order and circumstances. It helps us understand the way that we can orient ourselves to these individual things that occur in life. The wisdom that is talked about in Scripture is used for things that perhaps we would not normally associate with wisdom. For instance, wisdom is given to individuals in the book of Exodus in order that they might weave garments, or in order that they might do metal work, It's used in the book of Isaiah to talk about battle tactics. These are skills or practices that someone puts into their life because they have internalized wisdom. It provides discernment for how we go about functioning within the order of the universe. But then number 4, Van Leeuwen says, wisdom is grounded in tradition. The idea here is that there is not just a sense of order to wisdom, but that there is an agedness to wisdom. Wisdom is old. It's built into the created order. It's part of the foundation of the world. It's rooted in the past. And part of listening to the voice of wisdom means we listen to the voice of those who have gone before us. In fact, we listen to the voice of those who have gone much before us, so far back even that we get to the Garden of Eden. I think wisdom imagery, as it's portrayed in the Old Testament, even in the New, frequently references a garden or frequently alludes to this idea of a paradise where God seems to dwell with his people. There's a sense of a rootedness in the Garden of Eden that permeates, I think, all of the wisdom literature. And so as we begin to immerse ourselves in wisdom and try to understand wisdom, this is what can help us. So, in this section, as we're tuning our ears to hear wisdom, as we're listening to what wisdom might have to say to us, we do meet some more characters. If you remember our different lessons so far in the different sessions we have done, we've looked at some of the different characters that show up in the book of Proverbs. And here in this section, Proverbs 3, 21 to 35, we meet some more characters. Specifically, the characters that occur in this are the community that surrounds you. These are the people that you encounter as you live life on a regular basis in your community. And this community will end up really guiding and directing and steering your way, especially as regards to what the Father has to say to the Son in this section. And so, in verse 21, we're maintaining sound wisdom and discretion. We're not losing sight of them. In some ways, we're keeping our eye on wisdom. Like you might keep your eye on the ball. We're keeping our eye on wisdom. And what will happen? They will be life for you, an adornment for your neck. In some ways, it is living for your throat. It is life to you. It brings breath and hope to your soul. Like jewelry, they even add to your appearance if you will choose to listen to wisdom. Of course, this isn't some sort of external piece of jewelry that you might attach to yourself, but in many ways, wisdom is personified like things we put on, like clothing that we wear or jewelry that we adorn ourselves with. And then verse 23, you will go safely on your way, and your foot will not stumble. Your foot will travel safely. No injuries, no problems as you go along the way because you will have sure footing. And so, verse 24, when you lie down, you will not be afraid. You will lie down and your sleep will be pleasant. In general, if you internalize wisdom in your life, then you will be able to not have any worry about the unknown. Now, again, we're venturing into territory here that might sound like promises, right? That if we really do just trust the Lord, if we're really a good Christian, then we'll hear this word as a promise, an absolute promise that we'll never have any worry. But it seems that worry is just a part of life. What it seems the Father is recommending here is that in general, the wisdom way of life is one that allows us to rest in the sovereignty of God. The wisdom way of life allows us to lie down and not worry or not be afraid. Verse 25, don't fear sudden danger or the ruin of the wicked when it comes. Verse 26, for the Lord will be your confidence and will keep your foot from a snare. The calamity of the wicked, it seems the writer of Proverbs is suggesting, is not a matter of if, but when. They will fall. Calamity will come to them. So don't be afraid when it happens to them. And a reminder in verse 26, the Lord will be your confidence. God is in control. So make sure that you choose his path. If God is the one who ultimately directs things, it's much better to be on his path than to be on the path of any other. Remember, what we're hearing here is general wisdom, general advice about the way we live our life under God's good rule. It isn't a promise that our lives will be absolutely free of worry or that our lives will be absolutely free of pain. It doesn't seem that the Bible ever really promises that. In fact, to hold the book of Proverbs up against the book of Job has created quite a theological dilemma for many people because they hear what the book of Proverbs is saying, and it seems like the book of Job is saying that is not actually the way that life works. But I don't think the book of Proverbs and the book of Job have to stand in contrast or tension with one another. I think rather they tell the same story. And the story is this: God is a good God of all creation. Sometimes bad things happen to bad people, but frequently, as the book of Job reminds us, bad things happen to good people. Bad things happen because not because someone did something wrong, but just because this is the way of life. This is the way that life goes. But there's a settledness to those who find themselves living in wisdom that is not found somewhere else. And in general, what is usually true in life is that choosing this path, the way of wisdom, will lead you to much better places and a much better sense of peace and security in the sovereignty of God than it would be to abandon these paths altogether. And so now we get to the teaching, verse 27. When it is in your power, don't withhold good from the one to whom it belongs. Who are we talking about here? I think we're talking about the community. We're being introduced to the characters in this specific lesson, those who surround us, who we live next to, who we find ourselves interacting with on a regular basis. Fox reminds us that in Exodus 23, verse 4, we are told in the Mosaic Law that our enemy's ox that is struggling is actually our responsibility. Perhaps we would like to harbor bitterness against our neighbor. Perhaps our neighbor does us wrong or says something to us, does something to us, cheats us, scams us, and we're frustrated. We're irritated with our neighbor, and maybe we don't ever feel like we get justice against our neighbor. Well, the specific time when we might really be tempted to take vengeance against our neighbor or to hold a grudge against our neighbor is when evil comes to our neighbor, when we find that our neighbor is suffering under because of whatever circumstances he or she finds themselves in. Specifically, Exodus 23 brings a couple of examples to our mind. Perhaps you see your enemy's ox or donkey that's just wandering away, or perhaps you see them struggling under their burden. What do you do in this moment when your neighbor, your enemy, has an ox or a donkey who is struggling? What do you do? Do you allow them to go on their way? No. It says what you should do is you stop and you take care of the animal. You take care of your neighbor's property simply because this is what we do when we live in community with one another. I think this is what the book of Proverbs is reminding us here. When it's within your power, don't withhold good from someone. Don't use your past experiences with them or your grudges against them as a means to withhold the good. But if it's in your power, I think the Father is telling the Son here, do good. This is your responsibility. Also, verse 28, don't say to your neighbor, go away, come back later. I'll give it tomorrow, when it is there with you, right? Now, if you don't have it, right, can I borrow something? Can I have this from you? And you just don't have it with you, but you know you will have it tomorrow. You could tell them this, of course. But if you've got it there with you, don't tell them, hey, come back tomorrow. You can get it then, when you could give it to them now. Why would someone do this? I think it's a power play. I think it's a way of demonstrating your power, your control, your authority over your neighbor. Oh, you want something that I have? Sure, I'll give it to you, but on my terms, on my timeline. That's when I'll give it to you. And I think the writer of Proverbs here is saying, don't do that. Don't be like that. You have open hands with your neighbor. Don't tell him to come back when you've got it there with you. Verse 29, continuing on the same line. Don't plan any harm against your neighbor, for he trusts you and he lives near you. Because your neighbor is your community, be kind. Of course, as we're hearing these words, we're reminded of Leviticus 19, love your neighbor as yourself, which seems to be really at the heart of what the Mosaic Law is trying to get us to understand. Verse 30, Don't accuse anyone without cause when he has done you no harm. Don't falsely accuse someone, even in those times when you're a little bit grumpy. Don't falsely accuse someone. I know that if I look at my life and I look at my heart, the times when I'm most likely to blame someone or accuse someone are those times when perhaps I've done something wrong, or I haven't been careful, or I've overlooked something. And then when I begin to reap the consequences of my choices, I'm quick to point the blame. I'm quick to falsely accuse someone else simply because I'm unhappy with the way that my life is going. I think what the writer of Proverbs is saying is, don't be like that. Don't do that. Rather, make sure that if you're going to accuse, you have good evidence for it, right? Don't just accuse to someone when they've not done you any harm. Verse 31, don't envy a violent man or choose any of his ways. Now we turn a little bit here. Now we're talking about watching the ways of those who are within the community. And a man of violence may get what he wants. We may look at that and envy that ourselves. We may desire that for ourselves, but he pays for it with his life, I think the writer of Proverbs would say. So don't do that. Verse 32, for the devious are detestable to the Lord, but he is a friend to the upright. God is opposed to those who are devious. He finds that his ways are an abomination, right? The Hebrew word there is toeva. It even sounds bad. It's this idea of something that is completely detestable to the Lord, or an abomination to him. And those ways, the ways of the man of violence, are like that. His secret counsel, the Lord's secret counsel, though, that is for the upright. It is intimate and personal, and it helps us realize that there is a better way, right? Even though a man of violence may get what he wants, in reality, we trust the Lord, and we want the Lord's confidence, not the confidence of men of violence. And so we begin the summary then in verse 33. The Lord's curse is on the household of the wicked, but he blesses the home of the righteous. He will bless the settlement of those who find themselves aligned with him. He mocks those, verse 34, who mock, but gives grace to the humble. He dishes it back, it seems, to the scoffers. Verse 35, the wise will inherit honor, but he holds up fools to dishonor. In other words, there is honor for those who are wise and shame for the fools. I think then the lesson is for us to just step back and ask ourselves, how are we treating those around us? How do we go about living our lives within the communities in which God has placed us? There is a way that we can act that perhaps demonstrates to all that we are only concerned about ourselves, that it's our prerogative that we want to accomplish in life, that it's our objectives and our goals that we're consumed with fulfilling, and we don't care at all about what they're going through or what they're encountering. There's another way, though, and I think Proverbs is encouraging us here to assess the way we begin to treat those around us. You know, I have 5 children, and as I have gone through the process of raising them and disciplining them and training them in righteousness, I have found a phrase that frequently comes to my lips in moments of conflict is grace and kindness. I always ask my kids when they're talking with their siblings in a heated manner, I say, are we talking with grace and kindness? Are we treating one another with grace and kindness? And so many times, as I have been raising them, I've had to pause and even ask myself, is the way I'm asking this question treating my child with grace and kindness? Frequently, it's been a way for me to look back in a mirror at myself and recognize that I struggle with this too. Sometimes it's hard for us when life happens, when we go through the different things that we go through, to be able to maintain a spirit of grace and kindness with one another. But the wisdom way of life, it seems that the writer of Proverbs is suggesting to us here, is one in which grace and kindness is the framework with which we with which we approach everyone else around us. And so as we hear this specific word from the Father to the Son in Proverbs chapter 3, may we begin to ask ourselves, how might we be able to live our lives with grace and kindness to those around us?